Come closer. You've been feeling it too, haven't you? That subtle shift, a whisper of wrongness at the edge of your vision. It begins with a flicker, a momentary glitch in the reflection you trust. Soon it becomes a mirror of your deepest fears, a parasitic decay that consumes not just what you see, but who you are. Before we dive into the nightmare, do us a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us in the shadows. You won't want to miss a single nightmare. Elias Thorne was a master. A renowned portrait photographer, he had an uncanny ability to capture the very soul of his subjects. His studio, a sanctuary of light and shadow, was where he pursued his singular truth, to preserve beauty, to immortalize the essence of the human spirit. He believed in the clarity of sight, the honesty of the lens. The first crack was almost imperceptible. During a client review, Elias noticed a subtle flicker in their reflection, caught in the polished chrome of a photo frame. It was a fleeting distortion, like heat haze, a momentary elongation of their features. He dismissed it as a trick of the light, perhaps his eyes playing up after a long day of editing. A minor visual anomaly, nothing more. Later, developing a portrait from that very session, Elias frowned. The client's eyes, usually vibrant, appeared subtly elongated in the print, almost unnaturally tired. It was a disturbing nuance he hadn't noticed during the shoot. He blamed his equipment, a new, experimental lens he'd been testing. Surely it was a calibration issue, a digital artifact. He walked to his large studio mirror, scrutinizing his own reflection. His usual, composed self stared back, sharp eyes, a hint of fatigue, but nothing out of place. He adjusted his glasses, ran a hand through his hair, perfectly normal. He reassured himself. It was the new lens, definitely. He was just tired, overthinking things. A few days later, a colleague, reviewing Elias's latest gallery submission, paused. "There's a strange quality to these, Elias," she murmured, her brow furrowed, "almost haunting, like they've seen too much." Elias brushed it off, attributing it to his evolving style, but her words lingered, an unsettling echo in his thoughts. Walking through a bustling street, Elias caught a fleeting visual anomaly in a shop window. A passerby's reflection, for a split second, appeared skeletal, hollow-eyed. He blinked, shook his head. When he looked again, the reflection was normal. Fatigue, he decided, pure exhaustion. He was pushing himself too hard. He dismissed the growing unease as a result of overwork and stress. He needed a break, a cleanse from the relentless demands of his art. He decided to take a much-needed respite, to step away from the lens, from the constant pursuit of perfection. A few days of peace, he thought, would set everything right. Back home, unwinding, Elias entered his bathroom. The mirror above the sink seemed subtly off. The lines of his reflection appeared too sharp, almost unnaturally etched, while the colors of the room behind him were either too vibrant or unnaturally dull. He rubbed his eyes, but the unsettling clarity remained. He decided to take a quick self-portrait, a habit to check his camera's settings. The digital image on the screen looked perfectly normal, but as he lowered the camera, his reflection in the dark, circular lens momentarily seemed to sneer at him, a flash of malevolence in an otherwise innocuous surface. He recoiled. The distortions began to spread. Elias started noticing subtle warping in reflections from everyday objects. The polished surface of a spoon, the gleam of a metallic doorknob, the sleek bumper of a passing car. Each surface showed a momentary, unsettling stretch, a sickening fluidity that defied logic. It was everywhere. That night the horror intensified in his sleep. He suffered a vivid nightmare, trapped in a vast, echoing gallery. The walls were lined with his own portraits, but they were no longer works of beauty. They were decaying, leering, their eyes hollow, their hands reaching out from the canvases, desperate, predatory. He woke in a cold sweat. Determined to prove his lens was faulty, he called the client with the tired eyes, asking for a reshoot. In person, she looked perfectly normal. But as he peered through his camera's viewfinder, her face momentarily sagged, ancient and hollow, a visage of profound decay. He gasped, pulling the camera away, heart pounding. Desperate for a logical explanation, Elias blamed his expensive lens. It had to be faulty. It was the only rational answer. He meticulously packed it and took it to a professional inspection service, convinced they would find the defect, the tangible cause of his torment. The lens technician called him back 2 days later. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice puzzled, "we've run every diagnostic. There are no issues. Your equipment is in perfect working order." The words were a hammer blow, no explanation, no faulty lens. Elias was truly, horrifyingly alone in what he was seeing. A growing, instinctive unease took root. Elias started consciously avoiding direct eye contact with his own reflection. He'd avert his gaze from sharp windows, quickly glance away from mirrors, as if a monster lurked just beyond the glass, waiting to ambush him with his own twisted image. He felt hunted by himself. He began to perceive a faint, shimmering, almost imperceptible haze over certain reflective surfaces. It was like heat rising from asphalt, but colder, more sinister. The air itself seemed to vibrate, a subtle distortion that hinted at something else, something asterisk beneath asterisk the surface, trying to break through. A framed photograph in his home, a portrait of his deceased grandmother, seemed to subtly change over time. A slight shift in her expression, a deepening of malevolent shadows in her eyes. What was once a comforting image became a source of chilling dread. He could swear it was watching him. Convinced that the persistent distortions were merely smudges, Elias vigorously cleaned his bathroom mirror. He scrubbed and polished until his arm ached, but the unsettling effects remained. The lines were still too sharp, the colors still wrong, and a faint, almost imperceptible grimace seemed to cling to his reflection. During a new photo shoot, a young model shifted uncomfortably, looking away from the camera, her gaze fixed on something behind Elias. "Your eyes," she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, "they look strange in the glass." Elias froze. She saw it too. The horror was no longer confined to his mind. He whirled around, catching his own reflection in a chrome lamp base nearby. It was elongated, sickly, not quite human. His face stretched and warped, a nightmare caricature of himself. He whipped his gaze away, his stomach lurching. The world was twisting, and he was twisting with it. He confided in a close friend, an art critic, about his visual disturbances, downplaying them as severe stress, the toll of his demanding career. His friend, though dismissive of the supernatural, listened with concern, suggesting he see a doctor, get some rest. Elias felt a profound loneliness. No one understood. Frantically, Elias tried to capture the distortions with a secondary camera, aiming it at every warped reflection he saw. But when he reviewed the images, they always came out normal, pristine, as if mocking his sanity. The horror was his alone, a terrifying perception that isolated him completely. He developed a portrait of a usually innocent child he'd photographed weeks ago. The digital file was perfect, but the printed photo showed a subtle, unnatural grimace, a predatory glint in the child's eyes that wasn't there before. Elias tore it up in a panic, the sound of ripping paper echoing his fracturing mind. He began systematically covering all mirrors and reflective surfaces in his home, a growing paranoia consuming him. Sheets, blankets, black fabric, anything to hide the insidious reflections. But you've felt that too, haven't you? The feeling of being watched even by yourself. That night, Elias stood before a large, dark window, expecting to see his reflection. Instead, he saw a gaunt, predatory version of himself behind him, mirrored in the glass. Its eyes glowing faintly. It did not move as he moved. It just watched. He recoiled from the window, heart pounding like a trapped bird. The gaunt, predatory reflection had been there just a moment ago, looming behind him in the glass. He spun around, breath catching in his throat. Nothing. The room was empty, silent, save for the frantic beat of his own fear. The window reflected only the mundane, the familiar emptiness. But he knew what he had seen, and it had seen him. The world outside his studio became a blur. Elias canceled every shoot, every client meeting. He couldn't trust his eyes, couldn't trust his art. What horror would he capture next? What truth would his lens betray? Isolation became his only sanctuary, a fragile shield against the creeping madness. He was a photographer who could no longer look, could no longer create. The Mirrored Decay wasn't content with just his own image. It began to warp his environment. In the polished surface of his antique desk, the studio wall appeared crumbling, light fixtures twisted into grotesque shapes, familiar objects decaying rapidly. He'd glance up, and the physical reality remained pristine. But the reflection was a nightmare made manifest. Then came the others. Fleeting glimpses just at the edge of his vision, in the depth of a polished floor or the dark sheen of a framed print. Shadowy, skeletal figures lurking in the mirrored world, watching. Were they reflections of something that wasn't there, or something that was about to be? What would you do if you knew you were being observed, not by a person, but by a shadow in a mirror? His own reflection, once a trusted image, became a predatory entity. Its movements were subtly delayed, a sickening mimicry, or it would twist into a chilling, malevolent pose just as he shifted. It was a constant, unnerving reminder that something was wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong, with his very self. He was losing control of his own image. The calls began. Frantic, confused, horrified clients. One described a dead stare in her child's recently delivered portrait. Another, a subtle, grotesque elongation of her husband's features. Elias could only offer mumbled apologies, unable to explain the horror he had unwittingly captured, the decay he had unwittingly spread through his art. A particularly grotesque print, a portrait that had warped into a leering, decaying visage, lay before him. He tried to destroy it, to rip it, to burn it, but the image seemed to resist, almost fighting back. As the flames touched it, an unnatural, black, acrid smoke billowed, clinging to the air, a sickly sweet scent filling the room. The horror was tangible now. The whispers started, faint, guttural, seeping from the glass itself. They seemed to emanate from the predatory reflection, urging him closer, compelling him to accept. Accept what? The decay, the fracturing of his reality. He tried to block them out, but they burrowed into his mind, a constant, insidious hum beneath the surface of his sanity. He covered everything, every mirror, every window, every polished surface in his apartment. Blankets, cloths, even black paint. Anything to hide the insidious reflections, to escape the watching eyes. But the whispers still found him, echoing in the artificial gloom, and the glimpses, they still came. A polished spoon at breakfast, a puddle on the street, the dark screen of his phone. The mirrored decay found new surfaces, new insidious doorways, a fleeting glimpse of a gaunt, skeletal face in a polished doorknob. His own eyes, elongated and hollowed out, reflected in a forgotten CD case. There was no escape. The world itself was turning against him. The true terror began when the mirrored decay started to blade through, affecting his perception of non-reflective surfaces. On the street, a stranger's face would momentarily sag and hollow, their eyes empty pits, before snapping back to normal. A terrifying glimpse of what lay beneath, what was lurking, what was coming. Could you ever trust a face again? He desperately tried to photograph mundane objects, hoping to find a pattern, a way to prove what he was seeing. But the results were chaotic, fragmented. A simple chair would appear warped, its wood decaying. A bowl of fruit would show a scene of impossible rot. His camera, once his tool for truth, now only captured the horrifying lies of the distortion. Sleepless nights blurred into an endless search. Ancient myths, forgotten texts, esoteric folklore. He scoured every dusty corner of human history for answers. He found fragmented references to entities that fed on self-perception, doppelgangers that devoured identity, reflections that were not just images but doorways. The horror had a name, a history, and it was hungry. A small, jagged piece of shattered mirror lay on his studio floor, a fragment of his past sanity. In its reflection, the predatory entity now held its hand to the glass, an exact mirror of his own. But its fingers were skeletal, tipped with sharp, black claws. It was reaching, always reaching from its world into his. He met a close friend for coffee, a desperate attempt at normalcy. His friend was fine, laughing, oblivious. But in the polished surface of the coffee machine, Elias saw it. His friend's reflection, a decaying, monstrous visage, its eyes hollow. Would you have trusted them? Would you have believed your own eyes or the decaying lie in the glass? The whispers grew louder, more coherent. They mocked his desperate attempts to cling to sanity, telling him he was already lost, already consumed. They were no longer faint suggestions, but a chorus of insidious voices, pressing in from every reflective surface, telling him to yield, to embrace the truth of what he was becoming. He couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed a heavy tripod, screaming, and swung it at the large studio mirror. But his reflection smashed it with him. For a horrifying moment, the predatory reflection's hand appeared to pass through the glass, skeletal fingers reaching towards him. He screamed, dropping the tripod, scrambling backward, tripping over himself. Through the shattered fragments of the mirror, the distorted reflections began to reveal a world behind them. A decaying, twisted version of his apartment, filled with the shadowy, lurking entities he'd glimpsed before. They were there, just beyond the veil, waiting. His reality was becoming transparent, revealing the horror on the other side. A horrifying realization slammed into him. The mirrored decay wasn't just a distortion, a perception trick. It was a parasitic, malevolent dimension attempting to breach into his reality, using reflections as insidious doorways. It wasn't just showing him decay, it was bringing it. And he, Elias Thorne, had been its unwitting architect. Then came the ultimate betrayal. His own physical appearance began to subtly shift in reality, mimicking the decay he saw in his reflection. Subtle discolorations on his skin, a gaunt, drawn look to his face, but only he could truly perceive it. To others, he was just tired. He was becoming the monster in the mirror, but no one else could see it. He tried to document his own physical deterioration with his camera. He aimed the lens at himself, desperate for proof. But the lens, his trusted tool, captured only his normal self, pristine, unblemished. It was a cruel mockery, adding to his torment, pushing him further into the abyss of self-doubt. Was he truly seeing it, or was he finally, irrevocably insane? The predatory reflection, now almost entirely solid in the mirrors, no longer whispered. It demanded. It demanded he yield to the true reality, to embrace the decay, promising a twisted peace in surrender. Its eyes burned with a malevolent, triumphant light. It was no longer a reflection. It was a presence, a hungry, waiting presence. He was surrounded. Every metallic surface, every glass pane, every dark screen, all reflecting the predatory entity closing in, their whispers echoing, a deafening chorus now. They weren't just in the mirrors, they were everywhere. There was no escape. The walls were closing in, made of his own fractured perception. He discovered the final, horrifying truth. The mirrored decay fed on the observer's belief in the reflected reality, consuming their sense of self until they were hollowed out, becoming a vessel for the parasitic entity. His art, his desperate need to preserve beauty and truth, his focus on the visual, had made him uniquely vulnerable. He had invited it in. The predatory reflection in his large studio mirror extended a skeletal hand towards him, its eyes burning with malevolent, triumphant light. "Look closely, Elias," it hissed, its voice no longer a whisper, but a resonant command that vibrated through his very bones. "This is your truth. This is you asterisk." Elias, finally broken, stared into the glass. His own reflection blinked, then slowly, sickeningly, smiled not his smile, but the predatory, decaying grin of the entity. As the last vestiges of his identity crumbled, his eyes, in the reflection, began to glow with a familiar, malevolent light. And you, dear listener, what do you see when you look into the glass?